All right, so we're at the top of the hour, going to get started. If you have the link to this webinar, if you want to send that over to any of your colleagues or anybody who'd be interested in learning about, specifically today, retail and hotels, this would be a good time to send that over to them and get them into the webinar. All right, so I'm actually we're going to get started just at 11. And I'm going to pause our music here as much as we're jamming. Okay, all right, let's get started. So I'm doing things a little differently. I'm going to keep our panelists on here this week just to do some introductions and to get some familiar faces in. So thank you, viewers, for joining us this week in social distancing. I'm actually going to start off our webinar this week with a poll, just to learn more about who's out there. So go ahead and take this poll. We're looking at what category, there we go, what category best describes the industry you primarily work in? Education research, government public administration, healthcare, social assistance, hospitality, travel tourism, information services, data processing, real estate, restaurant QSR, retail, or any other sectors that we may not know about. All right, our poll is coming through. We'll give it a few more minutes. So actually, let me start off by saying, again, thank you for joining us. As I'm still amazed every time I check the number of registrations at the number of people who are joining us each week. So thank you for your support. And I hope that the data we've been providing to universities, researchers, tourism boards, and retail brands have helped in your effort to learn about the impact of COVID-19. So as I mentioned last week, this is a series that is just one piece of our effort to assist researchers and the global community in understanding the impact of COVID-19. And so we hope that you'll continue to join us for these webinars as we show you the research that we and our partners and our clients are doing. So I'm Evelina Giang, and I am the Director of Analytics and Data Solutions at UberMedia. Just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, and there will be a link to the webinar as well as a summary of what we talked about on our website afterwards. The website's covid19.ubermedia.com. We also welcome questions. And so down there on the Zoom taskbar, we do have an area where you can ask questions. So please be sure to, if any question pops into your head, put that into the Q&A, and we'll be sure to answer them. So I'm going to end our poll here, and you guys can see the results. Kerry, Connor, Evan, can you guys see the results there? Yes.
Yeah. Great, looks like about 40% of us are from the hospitality, travel, and tourism. Here to hear Evan, I guess, right?
Evan representing.
And a lot of analysts out there. 20% of us are analysts. That's great too.
We also have people, 20% from the information services and data processing. So we've got some data scientists and engineers out there, it sounds like. And then as well as real estate and retail, as well as some others. So let us know where you're coming from in the chat. All right, so I'm gonna close that poll now, and I'm gonna do a few introductions here. So joining us on the panel today, as I mentioned earlier, there are some new faces to the webinar. But if you've been working with UberMedia, these names are not a stranger to you. So again, I'm Evelina. And then we also have today in our webinar, Kerry Pearce, our Chief Product Officer and Senior VP of Engineering. We also have Evan Saunders, our VP of Tourism and Hospitality. And then we also have Connor Bowlin, VP of Strategy. Thank you so much, guys, for being here and joining me for this webinar. We're gonna dive into our topics now, and I'm gonna have everybody jump off of the webcam, and we're gonna focus primarily on the PowerPoint. All right, so let's go through this. All right, last week in our social distancing webinar, we focused on communities and using mobile location data to understand how the COVID-19 pandemic has affected them. So I want to highlight the actual response that we received on our initial findings on using mobile location data to understand homeless population movements. We got a lot of great feedback there, and that was really great to see because some of you might know that I'm a former social worker, so this topic is very near and dear to my heart. So any researcher, governor, city officials who want to work with us to put this data into action, please reach out to us. And then for these other topics, we covered looking at parts and how they've been affected by the COVID-19 and how COVID-19 has affected the tourism world. We also looked at different possible outbreak epicenters. So if you'd like to learn more about that webinar, if you didn't get to catch last week's episode, please head over to covid19.ubermedia.com. So this week, what we're going to be covering is we're actually going to be narrowing our focus to consumers and how mobile location data can be used to understand how COVID-19 has changed consumer habits. So first, we're going to start off with generally reviewing public activity trends throughout the nation and worldwide. Then we'll dive into retail with a focus on one of our essential business sectors, grocery. Then we'll shift to looking at tourism and specifically to see how mobile data can help us break down the makeup of guests to hotels that are still open during COVID-19. Now, in our last session, our last webinar, we just did a really quick overview of what mobile location data is. And looking at the attendee list, I see some new faces on here. So I'm gonna go a little deeper into how mobile location data is collected and where we get our data from and where we get our data from. So it'll be really quick, just to give everybody a refresher. Why we're doing this, and I wanted to show our mission statement here regarding COVID-19. Our mission with this initiative is to deliver mobile location data sets that can help answer critical epidemiological, resource planning, and economic questions that can help power crucial decision making during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so we're committed to helping research groups, helping our customers, and anybody else that wants to partner with us to use mobile data to understand the impact of COVID-19. Our reports are developed to be helpful while adhering to stringent privacy protocols. So we're compliant with GDPR, we're compliant with CCPA. So all device information is de-identified, and whenever possible, we aggregate that data. So if anybody has any questions regarding our privacy efforts and anything around our mission, please bring that up into the Q&A and we'll answer that. You can also email us at contact@ubermedia.com if you have any questions. Now, where does mobile location data come from? So when you download an app to your phone and the app asks you if you'd like to share your location and use location services, when a user opts in to using location services, then data can be collected. And data is collected from apps such as Words with Friends, news apps, weather apps, sports apps, navigation apps. UberMedia aggregates data from over 150,000 apps around the world. And so because mobile devices are constantly generating location data and we're constantly updating our pipeline, the data is near real time and is also on a global scale. So that makes mobile location data very uniquely poised here to give critical guidance in situations where historical data suddenly becomes irrelevant. So in a time like this, like a time like this with COVID-19. So I'm going to actually start off, we're going to start off this webinar with an example of how real-time our data can be with diving into what we can find out about public activity. So Connor, I'm going to actually throw this over to you to tell us more about our public activity index.
All right, thank you, Evelina. Let's see, so I'm just going to pop over the screen share onto a browser window of our covid19.ubermedia.com site. So one of the resources that we've made freely available here on this resource site is a public activity tracker that compares a foot traffic index that is drawn from various public areas in a few select metro areas, and it compares those to new cases for those areas. But the thing we want to concentrate on right now is this public activity index in the form of the foot traffic index. So starting off here, we're going to take a look at Boston, Massachusetts, home of Marky Mark Wahlberg. We can see that social distancing started off around March. And so this is really where the news about COVID-19 and the pandemic started to pick up steam. We saw people begin to take it a lot more seriously. And we saw policies start to come down, encouraging social distancing and mandating stay at home. So as we can see, the rate of foot traffic in these public spaces decreases pretty starkly initially, and then just starts to go down gradually. We've got a little bit of a pickup around here, starting near to mid-April. And then we again see a gradual decline with a slight uptick there at the end. But we're now going to fly across the country over to LA County, California, where we're going to again do a little bit of a comparison between LA and Boston. We can see a very similar pattern here, very familiar, where around March we start to see this dip as people start to, again, get these stay-at-home orders. They start to take it more seriously, start to practice social distancing. Even without zooming in here in the graph, we can see that Boston is in fact doing well, or doing better, excuse me, than we are here in LA. Perhaps that's due to the sunny weather, perhaps that's due to multiple other factors, but we can see that they are outpacing us in social distancing. And then the last one I'm going to jump down here to is Miami-Dade County, Florida. Florida, of course, home of the Big Cat Rescue and Carol Baskins, but right now we're going to look at Miami-Dade County. And so we see a very similar pattern, again, a decline in foot traffic at these public locations, but we don't see it quite at the same levels as Boston and LA. In particular, I might guide everyone's eyes towards these upticks where certain days of the week can encourage people to go out more. We're not working on the weekends, so we might venture out, try and get a hike in. We're going stir crazy, so we're starting to see it pick up a little bit here at the end. But we can see that those rates are much higher for Florida than they are for LA County and Boston. And then just for our webinar attendees today, I'm going to throw in a special bonus, a checkbox here for Madrid, Spain, where we can see that Madrid is putting us all to shame, even Boston. They're even beating Boston in social distancing in Madrid. So on a global scale, we can see we've got some catching up to do, particularly Florida. But overall, the trend is very positive. We see social distancing being enacted everywhere. And also you can see in the background here, the new cases have started to flatten out a bit. So that's just a quick look at our public activity tracker Again, available on our covid19.ubermedia.com site. This is again where we store our COVID-19 impact research resources. So feel free to go there, check it out, and then play around with the chart yourself. And back to you, Evelina.
Great, thank you, Connor. I'm gonna switch our screen back over to our slides here. Again, if you guys want to play with the data, I've played with it myself. You can go to the covid19.ubermedia.com website. And for anybody out there who is interested in using that data for their own studies, the data that is shown on the website is available in a data set as a spreadsheet. So be sure to contact us and we can send that over to you specifically for those metro areas that are in the public, in that website. All right, so I'm gonna switch gears a little bit here and we're gonna actually dive a little deeper now. So Connor gave us a high level look at public activity. And we're actually going to switch it over to Kerry, who is going to look at one sector that has been still active, and that's our grocery store sector. So Kerry, are you ready to join us here?
Yep, absolutely.
Great. So we're going to actually start off your section with another poll. And so I know that some people were not able to see some of the results. So I'll make sure that we share results with the poll after. So let me pull up our poll here and I'm gonna launch it. All right, so in the past week, how often have you gone to the grocery store? 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or more times. So I'm gonna wait for those results to come in. Kerry, how often have you gone to the
I'm actually one of those people that went twice because my first trip, I actually was foolish enough to try to go out looking for flour, which I don't know about everybody else, but in Southern California, I think everybody's staying home baking because there is no flour to be found anywhere. And I was actually looking at it to do some breading. Then wound up going out later in the week after a couple of days and didn't find any there. So I instead found some ramen noodles, which was another short supply thing. So I was very excited about that. So yeah, I'm one of those people that went out twice this week.
Twice, all right.
Yeah.
I went out once myself and it looks like the majority of our poll goers or poll takers are have gone once. So I'm going to end this poll and I am going to share our results here. Great. So it looks like you guys can see the results now. The majority of you have gone to the grocery store once. I have gone once this week too. And a pro tip out there, those Asian supermarkets, if you're near one, they are so fully stocked with things. So Kerry, if I knew you needed flour, I would have got you some. Yeah, at the market.
I live within a few miles of quite a number of Asian markets, so maybe I'll be going out for a third time this week. Doesn't come after me, or Mayor Rossetti.
All right, well, let's see how the rest of the nation looks like with their shopping behavior. So I'm gonna toss this over. I'm going to stop sharing our poll results and I'm going to toss this over to you, Kerry.
Cool. All right. So what we decided to do was take a look at national grocery store foot traffic. And you can see in this chart, here's our trend. For this analysis, we decided to use March 15th as a good sort of coverall date nationwide for when we started getting the shelter in place orders. And of course, the way that that's run out nationwide has been, different from state to state, and certainly some states didn't do any official shelter at home, but it was a good time for when it got into the national consciousness, and even people in states that didn't have shelter at home orders were hearing about others that did. So before the pandemic and before 3/15, you can kind of see this traffic that I think anybody working in grocery stores or retail will tell you that most shoppers were attending on Saturday and Sunday. And a good amount of people were seen in grocery stores in terms of an overall percentage of observed devices. But then after the state of emergency started happening, you can see that the foot traffic really started dropping off. Especially in that really steep decline in the week afterward. And since that time, from 322 sort of onward, you still kind of see a little bit of the seesawing and kind of leveling off at a new lower area. And still, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday seem to be the primary, the busiest shopping days across the board. And one interesting thing, though, has been the change in shopping days and times. This is looking again at pre and post COVID, the shopping days, where beforehand you saw the majority of traffic really Saturday being the darkest blue there is really kind of popping out as getting the majority of visits. But this is now kind of spreading out post COVID. You can see that all of the bars are now lower in size or more even in size. And the activity is sort of spread more out on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and even bleeding into Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. Leads you to think that, well, obviously a lot more people are not going out of their homes to work during the daytimes or are out of work, and so not concentrating so much on doing these kind of essential errands on the weekends. And then in terms of the time of day, we see a similar kind of thing. Pre-COVID-19, very much saw people coming at as school is letting out, as work is letting out, that the primary hours of shopping were in that late evening. Now we can see during the COVID time, much more spread out during the afternoon, where you have people coming between noon and 5, and just anecdotally myself, having been out a few times, it absolutely is, the hours of being busy have definitely spread out. The grocery store was pretty crowded at about 1 o'clock the other day when I went out. So you can really see how this change in shopping behavior, it's totally popping out of the mobile location data. The next thing that we did was we went ahead and decided to look at a regional grocery chain to try to see if whether or not some of the shelter in place, or if any one particular regional chain was different than what were patterns we're seeing nationally. So we used a grocery chain. It's got about 100 stores located in the Midwest. And we can see some interesting patterns pop out for this chain compared to other ones. For instance, yes, their overall store traffic is down, but there's an interesting side effect in terms of the number of new customers that they're getting. And so it's kind of a good news, bad news in that, they have less devices overall, but they are attracting a new customer. And so as we're starting to see, maybe, hopefully, knock on some sort of wood, a light at the end of the tunnel where the economy maybe can start moving back to a little bit more normal, here's an opportunity for this grocery chain to try to turn these new customers, which are exactly like what I just went through, right? Where I decided to go to another store that wasn't my usual grocery store in hopes that I would find flour there. We're probably seeing the same thing with this grocery store chain. And so how this grocery store can use this analysis is to say, oh, wow, we have these new customers. Maybe we can start advertising to them and turn them into regular customers as we start moving forward out of this pandemic. Some other interesting behavior changes for the regional grocery store. They're seeing most of their traffic still on Fridays and Saturdays. They're not seeing as much of a bump or a span out across multiple days, and that's on the left-hand side. On the right-hand side, you can see here that the regional grocery store actually has, though, that sort of spreading out of pattern of timing where it's much more concentrated during just those afternoon hours, and not as much shopping in the early mornings or the evenings. And then finally, some idea of how far people are traveling, and I can see a question popped up about this in our Q&A chat. So the mobile trade area is generated now. For some of you that have looked at trade or draw areas before, you might look at this shape and kind of be like, what is that? Oh, and actually somebody just asked this question, funny. So why is the shape of this trade area so strange? So our trade areas are not generated by 1, 3, or 5 mile rings or have limitations like that. Our trade areas are done by combining the home and work locations of the devices visiting the store. So this is based on actual store visitation, and this is one of those grocery stores chains north of Davenport, Iowa, actually. And so what we do is we basically take all the mobile points from people's travel to and from the grocery store, and also from the home and work locations. And we algorithmically draw a shape around that, which can lead to some odd looking shapes, but it can be insightful to say, for instance, like this one, you can see that this grocery store location is pulling people across the river from Moline, which could be people who are going to the grocery store after work, or maybe going to the grocery store, you know, on their way to work or things like that. So it can really kind of help a business understand really where people are coming from. So this was our trade area beforehand. If we take a look at it after COVID-19, you can really start to see that the whole entire draw area is starting to shrink, meaning that people are not traveling as far as they used to. And this could also be a side effect of people who are working in this area and maybe were living to the south are no longer doing that daily commute and going to those locations. So you can see that that draw area is really condensing. And on the next slide there, we can also see this when we sort of take and generate a heat map of customer origin points. Before pre-COVID, about 10% of devices lived within a couple of miles of the store, and that you saw a good percentage of the devices, 20% of them were actually out at 25 plus miles. So they were drawing from pretty far. But now after, if we take a look at where we layer in the red origin points now in terms of the after and use that as a heat map, you can see that now almost 20% of the visitors live between 0 and 2 miles away. So we're really seeing people travel a whole lot less. And that kind of figures out in one zip code. In fact, this 52722 zip code actually saw a 7% jump in terms of visitation from that particular zip code. So again, from a recovery perspective, really speaking to that, that local aspect now and new customers where they weren't seeing that before. And so as we look forward to recovery planning, you know, mobile data can do a lot of different things for you. Some of the stuff that we showed you today is comparing the foot traffic of your brand to a national sector or to other local competitors. You can really get an understanding about how your trade area has changed or your customer base has changed because this is unprecedented times. We are seeing in changes of things like this. And then also to use this information about how you're doing with your customers, where you might be gaining or losing customers, how your customer visitation patterns have changed, and how that can then turn around and inform some sort of marketing effort, you know, again, as we're sort of heading the light out of the tunnel. I saw a couple questions come up in the chat. One was, how can you determine an individual's quote unquote work or home location from the data? We sort of step back a little bit from calling things home and work. We refer to them as common evening and common daytime locations because that's really what they are. We look back at a pattern of device usage over the previous 3 months period of time, weighted toward the most recent month, and determine the most frequent resting place for that device. Generally, this will be about 90% of people will be on an actual home for a common evening location. But it's not guaranteed to be a home. And so we're not trying to do, in our spirit of privacy, we're not trying to match a particular device to an address or a person or a household or anything like that. It's literally just looking at, this is the place where that device spends the most of his time on the evenings or weekends or during the daytime. So I hope that answers that question. And that's all I had, Evelina, if we want to.
Yeah.
Questions came up that I missed.
Yeah, there's another question here. One asked, what percent, for the total visits that you see at a location, what percent of outliers do you suggest taking out?
Oh, generally as a best practice, we recommend 70% of retained, so 30% of outliers fall away. But our system is actually flexible enough that you can choose to do that. And so we have a number of our clients who run at a 60% retained rate, 65, 80, anywhere in between. Our data and our platform, Vista platform, supports you making that determination on what's right for your business. We're the experts in location data, not in anybody's business. And so we try to be as flexible as possible in determining things like that.
Great. So if anybody else, as you're kind of processing what Kerry has shown in regards to mobile trade areas, common evening location points, looking at origin points, time of day, and day of the week studies. If you have any further questions, be sure to chime in the Q&A section, and I'll be sure to bring Kerry back up to answer those questions. Thanks, Kerry. All right, so I am going to actually continue what on the same topic that Kerry has brought in terms of grocery. I'm going to actually go even one step further down and look at a shopping center. And so what you had saw in Kerry's presentation is data that's pulled from our Vista Data Explorer. And so these are data sets that our team will pull from Data Explorer and put into a spatial or analytics software like Esri ArcGIS, Tableau, CartoDB, and for some of our data sets, even using Excel to understand what's going on with a location. That's possible with our Vista Data Explorer. We do have another tool here that I love to go to for quick answers when I don't want to open up one of the spatial software. So I'm going to actually go out of this here and head over to our Vista property reports. So with Vista property reports, this is a quick way for me as an analyst to understand what's going on at a location. So when I sign in here, I just polygon a location and I put in the time frame that I want to look at. And what comes back to me is this report that visually and graphically shows what's going on at that location. And so for this study here, as I wanted to learn about the effects of COVID-19 on our shopping centers, I pulled information on the Fresh Pond Mall in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So here you'll see the polygon that I drew, and here we're looking at pre-COVID-19. And so pre-COVID-19, we see that the activity in the shopping center is pretty spread out. There is a cinema here at the shopping center. So mobile location data, since it does provide you, the coordinates of where we see the mobile device, you'll see that mapped out here. So we saw people with devices that are at Apple Cinema in this area. We also see that there are devices that are seen at Staples, this McDonald's here, and then there's actually a TJ Maxx and a Whole Foods here. So lots of activity in this shopping center. If I keep scrolling down, I can also understand visitation over time for this shopping center. I can dive deeper into just learning about the foot traffic at this location during the beginning of 2020, before COVID-19. We can also look at visitation times, day of the week, and time of day. So we saw for this shopping center that, interestingly enough, that Monday and Tuesday are the top visitation days for the shopping center. And that is probably because it has a McDonald's in the shopping center. So we're seeing a lot of lunchtime activity in this area, as you see with the 12 o'clock bar being the highest. We also see 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock as top times during this pre-COVID time for the shopping center. Now this shape might look a little familiar as Kerry has showed what a mobile trade area looks like. So we have pre-COVID what the mobile trade area looked like for Fresh Pond Mall. We see that it spans out into the Boston area and as well as into the suburbs outside of Cambridge. And Kerry also talked about common evening locations. So looking at where a phone sits mostly during the weekends and weekends to derive a possible origin point for that device. So you see with pre-COVID that it's pretty spread out, and as we saw with the mobile trade area above, lots of devices coming from each of the nearby suburbs. Our data can also give insight into where people are coming and going to before and after they arrive at the location, and that's where this pathing data comes into handy. And we can also provide demographics and also looking at what other brands people have an affinity to. So I'm going to actually dive into this right after I go into the post-COVID. So I actually pulled another report here that looked at the same shopping center, but at a different time frame. So I'm just looking at post-COVID-19. And so it was pretty stark contrast here. So pre-COVID-19, we saw that the shopping center was pretty filled up. We saw that there was activity throughout the shopping center, but reflecting the closure of non-essential businesses. And what we see here is Whole Foods is still seeing that traffic activity. This is that McDonald's there. There's also a Staples. But look at this blank spot here, the cinema. I know that I actually saw an article about how people are finding different ways to cope because they can't go to the cinema anymore. And that's reflected in our foot traffic analysis here. We also saw TJ Maxx with this big gap here. Now, one thing I want to point out, so we can look at the foot traffic post-COVID-19. We can look at how visitation times have changed. Particularly what I wanted to point out is the mobile trade area. So as we saw with the previous analysis with the grocery store chain, we see with this shopping center that the mobile trade area has also shrunken. And so I had pointed out that their trade area extended into Boston before. So we're probably getting commuters from Boston, probably coming from work or going to work, going to this shopping center. So, but post-COVID-19, we're not seeing that case. And then we see that the shape is a little more refined than it was before. So we're getting particular neighborhoods that are traveling to this shopping center for their probably grocery store needs or their McDonald's fix. Now, another thing I wanted to point out that I gleaned through really quickly is this report here about the brands that the devices have an affinity to. So what this report does is it looks at everybody that was seen in the shopping center, and it also analyzes what other brands are we seeing, what other locations brands are we seeing these devices at, these visitors at. And so this is really helpful now because we can see what brands are people still going to, what brands are still holding up strong. And for a shopping center who has lost many tenants, this information can be really helpful because they can understand, okay, in the area around me, what other stores are people going to? What other brands are they going to? And who can I possibly bring into my shopping center after COVID-19, after stay-at-home orders, to help boost up my shopping center again? And so if I look at just grocery stores, here I have pre-COVID-19. If I pull up grocery store brands here, we see that there's a pretty long list here. We see Whole Foods because there's a shopping center that the shopping center does have a Whole Foods, so those people are more likely to visit a Whole Foods. But we also see Trader Joe's. We see H Mart, which is an Asian market, and we see Wegmans pop up here as well as Stop and Shop. But at post-COVID-19, if we pull this list up, we actually see a lot of those grocery stores have disappeared. And for the consumers that this shopping center is attracting, these are now their top grocery stores that they're going to. So they're not only going to Whole Foods, but we see them cross-shopping at Star Market, Trader Joe's, and the Stop and Shop. So UberMedia has over 1.5 million polygons in our library, and we also have most regional and national brands polygoned in our library. So we can look at this across sectors and across brands. So again, this is our Vista property reports, and it is going to be launching next week, actually. And it is a self-service tool, so you would be able to go into the website, draw the location that you want to look at, put in the time frame, and pretty readily get a report back with that same information that that I had showed you earlier on the website. And so for any businesses, small businesses, big brands that want to quickly get some information on how COVID-19 has impacted their locations, the Vista property property report is a great tool for doing that analysis. So if you want more information about this and about the launch next week, be sure to contact us at contact@ubermedia.com.
Hey, Ev, this is Kerry. I wanted to just call attention to a couple of questions that we had.
Oh, great.
One that came in was, can you distinguish retail store employees versus visitors?
Yeah, so what we do there is with our common evening and our common daytime locations. So for that specific question, looking at common daytime locations, so where does a device spend most of their time during work hours? We use that, the results from that algorithm to filter out any employees, possible employees at that location. So we are able to do that in our data.
Yeah, and I'll also to tap onto that to say that our platform, if you have a rule set that you're interested in using that's different than ours, you can get the data that's all the pings in a location and make your own sort of analysis as well. It's possible that way too.
Okay. Looks like I have some other questions about our Vista property report. So the other question that came up is, it looks like I geofenced the entire shopping center, which I did. I went into a satellite view and drew the boundaries of Fresh Pond Mall. Do you need to have a polygon for each individual brand within the shopping center? Now, that depends on the analysis that you're looking to do. So in this case, we did the entire shopping center because I wanted to know just generally how visitation looked at that shopping center. But if you wanted to look at an individual store in the center, like the McDonald's or the Whole Foods, you can definitely polygon that, just polygon that Whole Foods or polygon that McDonald's to understand visitation to that location. Another question here, what is the range and cost of the Vista property reports? Great question. So the pricing starts at $59 a month for the results that you saw me walk through. So it's a pretty low cost way to start off your analysis for a location. Again, if you're interested in Vista property reports, go ahead and check out contact@ubermedia.com. And if you have any other questions about looking at consumer behavior, understanding visitation to the location, and any of the analysis that we had just shown, be sure to put that through into the Q&A section. I know I have some further questions. Let me answer one more before we actually dive into tourism here. So do you have a way to distinguish between primary versus secondary versus tertiary trade areas based off of the % of visitors seen? So right now in our system, you can do multiple runs of a trade area to see that. So if you wanted to understand yeah, you can do multiple runs of the trade area to see that. So another way to do it is to contextualize the common evening location origin points. So with those common evening locations, we can break down the top zip codes, we can break down the top census block groups. And so you can decide what zip codes and what census block groups you want to look at, like how far they are, in order to do the trade areas by those 3 breakdowns. All right, so I'm going to switch gears again, and we're going to actually dive into another location analysis, but this time with a focus on tourism. So I'm actually going to hand this over to Evan.
Awesome. Excited to jump in and appreciate basically everyone staying through the entirety of this webinar thus far and chat about hotel visitation. Last week, if you remember, we looked at, we had New York City and Company join us and present their dashboard on visitation to public areas. And essentially, we're seeing the same question resonate across the country in tourism, which is, what are people doing and who are these people? It's a simple question because most quote unquote tourist locations are closed, even some public ones like hiking trails or parks or beaches in some parts of our country are closed and other parts of the country it's open. So it's tough to take one observation and apply it to everyone in America or even the world. We do a lot of work in Europe and Australia and Asia as well. But one thing we decided to dig a bit deeper into is the idea of hotels. Who are staying at hotels? And again, that's a really broad topic because there are a lot of different types of hotels. There's airport hotels, urban hotels, resorts out in the middle of nowhere. But as we started digging into STR reports, we saw a lot of properties were getting upwards of 20% occupancy rates. And I thought that personally was impressive. And it's definitely an odd day when we think upwards of 20% occupancy is impressive. But essentially, we wanted to ask ourselves, who are these guests? And sort of paint a picture of them to help hotels understand who their guests are and how that may have changed. We started to focus our analysis on 5-star properties. As I mentioned, there's a lot of different hotels in the world, but we honed in on 5-star hotels because that's where we're seeing a different type of visitor anecdotally. So we're seeing a lot of essential workers staying at urban properties, but not necessarily the 5-star hotels. We're seeing airline crews continue to stay at properties near airports, but again, that's not 5-star hotels. So when we think about 5-star hotels like Ritz-Carlton, Waldorf Astoria, and Four Seasons, we think of it more as a leisure getaway that's happening really right now, especially. A lot of people do go on business trips and stay at these types of properties, but for the most part, right now, we're seeing mostly leisure guests at these properties. Why do people stay at 5-star hotels, both pre and post-COVID? There's a lot of reasons. Events, visiting family and not wanting to stay with the family, quick getaways, staycations. Here in LA, perhaps they're getting plastic surgery and they're staying in the hotel. But what we're seeing, interestingly enough, before and after COVID, and the way we got this data, as you should know, is we have almost every hotel chain in the country in our database. So we're measuring daily activity at basically every chain hotel in the country every single day. And so we picked out these 3 brands to understand pre and post. You'll see very different, obviously, occupancies dropping across the map for all these properties, but you're seeing the same peaks and valleys, both pre and post COVID, which essentially, if you just look at those dates, are weekdays versus weekends. We're seeing valleys on the weekdays, we're seeing peaks on the weekends. And that's where we're seeing that sometimes upwards of 25% occupancy is on the weekends. So you can go next slide, I'll show that. So we wanted to understand who these guests were. And the way we do that is, again, with our methodology of understanding common evening locations. So where do people live? But first, we wanted to understand just the amount of distance people live from these properties. And again, this is summarizing across the country. We'll go into a specific property after this. But as we summarize this across the country, it's interesting to see, okay, pre-COVID, interesting, obviously, a lot of long haul guests, some short haul, a lot of driving distance people. We put that at 100 miles. But if you look at it post-COVID, you'll see a pretty stark change that I bet it's not going to surprise any of us to understand we see a higher percentage of people within driving distance and a smaller percentage of people who are essentially this long haul traveler. Believe it or not, we still do see people traveling around the country. We have plenty of data that show on cities that people are experiencing visitors from other states and other DMAs. But essentially, as we look at hotels across the board, we see a pretty significant drop in long haul and a significant increase in driving distance, which makes a lot of sense. But rather than generalize this, we can look at it a little more specifically, which is what we recommend anyone do that for their own city or their own properties or their own competitive set. So here we're looking at a luxury property in Santa Barbara. That's just north of Los Angeles. Santa Barbara still has their beaches open. It's driving distance from Los Angeles, as well as a lot of other places in California. And if we look before COVID-19 happened, and I'm going to point out just two things on here. Obviously, people are always coming from around the country, but we're still seeing Los Angeles, which is a drive market, as their #1 visitor at 25%. So even before COVID, we're seeing people doing maybe not staycations because they're not really in Santa Barbara, but they're definitely leaving the Los Angeles market and staying. And then Santa Barbara, the county of, we're seeing only about 18% of their visitors. So the quote unquote hyper local visitor is #2 on this at 18%. Now, if we see post-COVID, interestingly enough, Los Angeles is almost at the exact same percentage. So people are still leaving basically Los Angeles and going to this property. I believe this is over the weekends as well, almost at the same rate. So their pull from the Los Angeles, that drive market, is the same rate. But their quote unquote, I would call a staycation market, which is the same DMA that they're in the Santa Barbara one, has increased dramatically. They're seeing a lot more people, perhaps who are really, really familiar with the property, going and staying there. And that really resonates to me because a lot of the locals in Santa Barbara will know this property. They'll have perhaps been there, even if it's just for lunch to this property. They are very familiar with the brand and perhaps the standards and cleanliness and honestly the trustworthiness that this property may have, which is perhaps why we're seeing such a stark increase of quote unquote hyper locals going and staying at this property, even in a post-COVID world. Just really interesting to see that. One thing which was really interesting too is you can literally right now get, you can book 5-star hotels at like 2 or 3-star prices, which is bittersweet for this world. In fact, I just got off a call with someone who booked late August round trip to Greece from New York for $300. So there's definitely opportunity to take advantage of some of these previously expensive opportunities at a little bit of a discount. And what's really interesting is we use demographic data as we looked across the board to understand what's the demographics of people who stay at 5-star hotels before and after COVID-19. And what we're seeing here is and there's obviously a lot more than just income, but what we're seeing is the median household income dropped over 10%. So we're seeing actually a new demographic. We're seeing people who maybe said, you know, I couldn't afford that previously, but heck, at 50 or even 60% off, yeah, I would love to go stay at that 5-star hotel and get out of my apartment or condo or wherever I am, which is a massive shift and a massive opportunity and honestly a new market for 5-star hotels or for destinations that have luxury properties there. And of course, this isn't necessarily for right here, right now, but as we go through the recovery process and we perhaps see luxury hotel rates stay low, we'll be able to have a new demographic that might want to take advantage of those luxury properties. So to sum it up, and I had to come up with only 3 things right here, is well, the first one being we always love to match occupancy changes and rates with the origin markets that are actually staying at these properties. Especially at a time like this, it allows us to be really, really effective with our marketing budgets, whether we're a destination or whether we're actually a hospitality chain. For these staycations and driving distance, we all think about locals and hyper locals, but that Santa Barbara example shows that there is actually a difference potentially between people staycationing, maybe they live in the exact same city or area, and people who might be driving from 100 or 200 miles away. Those could be very, very different markets. The people driving from 200 miles away maybe have never really heard of your property, but want to go stay in that area. Whereas the people doing staycations might be really familiar with your brand, and the fact that they want to emphasize their sort of loyalty and stay there, they would essentially love to experience it with you. And so it's about more winning that customer over that is already familiar with you. And of course, the third one here, and this is more about historical data that we've had, I guess you could say a lot of fun or intrigue looking at here at UberMedia, is to understand, if you think about, let's say May, June, July last year, what percentage of your guests were from outside of America? What percentage were from even Canada, because we can't travel to and from Canada right now? What percentage of them were the statistically, understanding a long haul visitor who might be flying in? If you can understand these origin markets last year, you can do a little more calculations to understand how you might be impacted by the fact that these people perhaps are unable to or might not want to come and stay at your property. So just good to keep in your back of your mind as we go through the coming months. And that was my segment.
All right, thanks, Evan. So we do have some questions here for you. And I know we're hitting the top of the hour, so we're gonna go through these pretty quickly. But I think for one of our guests had a question about luxury hotels in general. And if the data was shown for actually luxury hotel specifically, if this luxury hotels household demographics was specifically for the Santa Barbara or for all luxury hotels. And so I think I'll answer this one. So for this slide, we are looking at all luxury hotels and what that general change of income is for all hotels. Let's see, another question here. What is the source for demographics? So for the demographics here, we do use the common evening locations of the devices, and we pull what census block groups those common evening locations are from. And so we get a weighted average, and you weigh that against the American Community Survey data from the US Census Bureau in order to come up with household demographics. Another question here is, how do you determine the median income of guests, and can that be paired with purchase data? So I just answered that question. It's based off of census data, and it can be paired with purchase data that maybe you get from MasterCard or your point of sales data or anything like that. So I'm gonna jump over to our researcher portal section. Connor, we do have some questions left that are coming from our viewers. So I'm gonna push you to go through this section, and then we'll jump into that Q&A section.
Sure, no problem. We'll try and go through this stuff as fast as we can. So I just want to take a brief moment here and talk about our COVID-19 researcher portal. So this is what I showed earlier, where you can see a lot of our resources available to researchers to assist them to study the impact of COVID-19 and social distancing. So I'll just go some quick highlights here to start off the research data directory. So this is research from a variety of providers gathered in one convenient place. So if you're looking for different resources you can use to study COVID-19, different data sets, these are all gathered for you conveniently in one spot, so you can kick things off very easily there. And then along that theme of kicking things off easily, we have the mobile data tutorials. So we know that mobile data can be a little bit intimidating, a little bit tough to get started with, and sometimes it's helpful just to have a guide to walk you through some of those initial steps of what you're looking at and how to kind of massage it into a place where you can really not just look at it, but analyze it. So we've gathered some tutorials for using mobile data that apply to different verticals like epidemiological studies, government studies, retail impact, things like that. So I would encourage everyone to jump in there, find your vertical, and then learn how to get started. And those resources, of course, join the other resources that we have in the form of the research blog, where we post all the research that you've seen on the webinar today, as well as other webinars and additional research that we've developed. You can also get notified of new pieces of research, new data sets, and other developments in our COVID-19 resources by joining our mailing list on covid19.ubermedia.com. And then finally, we have our webinars that you are obviously aware of because you are watching one right now. So all of these, once more, can be found on covid19.ubermedia.com. I would encourage you guys to go there and check them out. I would also like to highlight one more data set that we spoke about last week, but I think it's important to mention again, and that is our close contact data set. So you may have kind of heard about other data sets out there that might look at things like how often people are leaving home, how much time they spend outside of their home. But for really studying kind of social distancing, we went the extra mile and we developed a data set that looks at the intersection of devices and frequency of that in different areas based on if the devices come into a certain distance between each other, and then also for a certain time period. So that might be something along the lines of 5 meters in 5 minutes, or any other kind of scenario that you want to look at. But that's just one data set that I wanted to highlight that is pretty advanced, and I hope you all get a chance to check it out, as well as our research resources page on covid19.ubermedia.com.
All right, thank you, Connor. All right, so I have a couple of questions here that I want to get answered before we end our webinar. These are actually for Kerry. Kerry, we have you on?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Great. All right, so one question we got from a viewer is, what has been the change in quality and I think it's quality and quantity of the data as phone manufacturers have made it easier to opt out?
So this is a great question. Phone manufacturers have indeed made it easier to opt out. Interestingly enough, not a lot of people are taking advantage of that. I think that is due to the fact that a lot of the apps which choose to put location SDKs inside of their apps are doing so because location is such a fundamental part of the app's reason for being. And as a result, they feel more comfortable keeping their location services on. And so we have seen a slight shift to be a little more heavy on the Android side because Apple for a while was being really diligent about opting out, but I think they've tailed that off a little bit, perhaps because people got tired of answering the same question over and over again, as we do, with toddlers, for example. We certainly don't want our phone asking us the same question over and over again. So in fact, our data has been steadily growing since 2016, and we haven't really seen that tail off too much in the last few, since Apple started really kind of pushing that last fall.
Great. And definitely we do see those trends come up and down with that data, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Another question here is, would be curious, I guess it's not a question, it's more of a statement, declaration.
Okay.
Would be curious to see Vista for cities, destinations.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So the Vista property report is definitely right now sort of really focused on retail locations, but it's our plan in the future to expand it to other use cases and other types of questions like for cities and destinations that people answer. There's some challenges. Cities, we have so much data for cities that it can be troubling for people's browsers to show that data in a meaningful way. But we're working on trying to get that solved. And you'll hear announcements from us as we expand out that particular visualization interface. We have other tools in Vista that you can use for cities and destinations right now that don't include those visualizations, but partner extraordinarily well with an external tool like Esri's ArcGIS or Carto, for example. So just hit us up and we can talk through your use cases and see what we can do to help you out.
Yeah, I think Evan would definitely be the best point person for that.
Oh, for sure.
You like what Evan is showing and you want to learn more about that with cities and destinations, definitely be the point person there. One more question here. I thought your data is aggregated mobile data, and then it looks like you're also collecting demographic data.
Yeah, so just to be clear, we're not collecting demographic data. So I can't we can't say that the owner of this one particular device is, you know, and to use Evelina's thing, is a, you know, between 25 and 34-year-old Asian female that lives at this particular location. That's not the way we do it. What we're doing is taking the resting place of the device on the nights and the weekends, and we're putting that inside of a census block group, and we're using that census block group, which is household level data. So it's not individual device level data. So it's not that we're collecting the demographic data, it's that we're tying this frequency analysis to the census block group, which then ties to the demographic data.
Yep, so that's why we're always saying it's household demographics that we're looking at.
Yeah, and the data is, the best way to think about it is you get it either de-identified or anonymous, or sometimes both.
Connor, we have one for you.
All right.
This is really exciting. Can I contribute to the research blog? And how do I become a data provider in the research data directory?
So the answer is yes, you can contribute to the research blog. It's kind of done the same way as the process to become a data provider in the research directory. First step is just to reach out at contact@ubermedia.com. We have a flow we can kind of like walk you through in order to get that research both onto the blog, and then also to list your particular data set in the research data directory. And we always want to share these resources from wherever they come from with researchers looking to study the impact of COVID-19. So once more, just reach out to contact@ubermedia.com.
Great. And anybody who is interested in contributing to that research blog, I would love to work with you. So definitely contact us, and we'll get you started, as Connor mentioned. Another one here, how far back pre-COVID can your data be accessed? So our data goes back goes back 5 years. we've been in the business for a while, and started start collecting data around 5 years ago. And so we have information about, or data on locations going back then. So you can look at trends from this year. You can look at trends from 2019 or 2018. All right. So those, if you have any other questions or comments about this webinar or any previous webinars, any of the analysis that we've gone through today, please reach out to us at this email or contact your UberMedia representative. Our next webinar will be our next webinar will be announced on the website, and we'll be sure to push that out to everybody once we get that together. Thank you so much, everyone, and I look forward to seeing you at the next webinar. Bye-bye.